Like so many things that have been co-opted by bad faith actors determined to splash their ideological diarrhea on every surface of our lives, I'm sure the filibuster must have seemed like a good idea at the time. The filibuster is a parliamentary tactic that allows a minority of legislators, or even a single legislator, to block action by forcing debate on that action to continue indefinitely. The practice dates back at least to ancient Rome, when the renowned senator and political nemesis of Julius Caesar, Cato the Younger, would block legislation by speaking until sundown, when Senate rules required it to adjourn. The idea is to delay a vote on a given measure for so long that those in favor of it either give up or propose a more acceptable compromise. It's like the political version of that sitcom plot where one character thinks another character is in love with them, so they act like the biggest asshole in the world on purpose in an attempt to drive them off. Kind of, not exactly, that's a reach, but you get the idea, right? The most familiar filibuster to most Americans is one that didn't even happen in real life. It happened in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, an extremely corny and overrated movie that nonetheless vaulted Jimmy Stewart into movie stardom, and also Claude Rains is in it, so I guess it can't be that bad. But anyway, the film's most celebrated scene features Senator Smith, played by Jimmy Stewart, filibustering a corrupt appropriations bill by speaking continuously for more than a day before finally collapsing on the Senate floor. The longest real-life single-person filibuster in the U.S. Senate lasted over 24 hours and was performed in 1957 by Senator Strom Thurmond, who was attempting to block the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1957. He failed. The act passed and was signed into law by President Eisenhower in September of that year. Also, that's not the most famous Civil Rights Act. When people say the Civil Rights Act, they're typically referring to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And Senator Thurmond filibustered that one too, only that time he wasn't alone. He was part of a group of Southern senators who worked together to filibuster the bill for 60 days. The Civil Rights Act. White Southern senators really didn't like the Civil Rights Act. And they still don't, but that's not what this video is about. That racist 60-day super filibuster was finally ended by a cloture vote. That's when a large enough majority of senators all get together and decide to end the debate. In 1964, cloture required a 2/3 majority. In 1975, the rules were changed so that cloture only required a 3/5 majority. Since the Senate consists of 100 senators, that means at least 60 votes. And that's more or less where we stand today. Actual filibusters, where senators hold the floor for an extended period of time to prolong debate, are relatively rare, but the threat of a filibuster and the requirement of at least 60 votes to prevent one means that a large enough minority of senators can essentially obstruct whatever legislation it wants. The U.S. Senate is currently split 50-50 between Republicans and Democrats. The Democrats technically control the chamber thanks to the tie-breaking vote of Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris, but with 50 Republicans, all of whom are either committed obstructionists or too cowardly to stand up to the committed obstructionists, it's virtually impossible to get anything done. At least, that's how it stands under the current Senate rules. The good news is the Senate rules, including the rules governing the filibuster, aren't in the Constitution, which means the Senate can change them whenever it wants. And changing the rules only requires a simple majority vote. That's 51, not 60. And counting the vice president, guess how many votes the Democrats have in the Senate? Actually, it's 49. Well, more precisely, it's 49 at most. According to a running tally maintained by the Washington Post, most Senate Democrats are at least open to changing the rules surrounding the filibuster. Only 34 have actually committed to changing or eliminating the filibuster. But on the other end of the spectrum, only 2 have consistently stood in opposition to it. The 2 Democratic senators who have so far refused to support changing or eliminating the filibuster are Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona. And look, a lot of progressives think Manchin and Sinema are self-centered assholes who are stopping the entire Democratic caucus from acting on various measures that are of vital and immediate importance to the country, including bills investing in infrastructure, strengthening voting rights, and funding the government so it can continue, operating. And I'm right there with you. I'm as frustrated by Manchin and Sinema as anyone, but rather than attack them, I want to attack their stated reasons for opposing the elimination of the filibuster, because those reasons are appealing to more than just the two of them. Back in June, Senator Sinema wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post where she argues that ending the filibuster is a bad idea because then Democrats will be unable to use it to block harmful legislation the next time they're in the minority. Sinema warns that eliminating the filibuster to pass progressive legislation now could make it easier for future Republican majorities to repeal that legislation and pass far more restrictive and regressive bills of their own. And viewed from this perspective, changing or doing away with the filibuster seems short-sighted, even self-destructive in the long term. It's not an argument that can be easily dismissed. For my money, it's the strongest argument against getting rid of the 60-vote threshold, but I'm not moved by it for a couple of reasons. First, the filibuster isn't nearly so strong a barricade against Republican extremism as Senator Sinema thinks it is. Sure, it works that way as long as it's there, but I have no doubt that if the Democrats don't get rid of the 60-vote threshold now, the next time the Republicans hold a majority in the Senate, they will. As soon as Republicans take control of the chamber and the Democrats use the filibuster to block one of their pet projects, I'll predict, a bill to make gun ownership mandatory, and I mean mandatory handguns, which are small and lightweight and remind you of holding your own penis, not those big, heavy rifles and shotguns that make you think of gripping the much larger penises of other men. Anyway, as soon as the Democrats try to block that, the Republicans will use their simple majority to change the Senate rules, and before you know it, the filibuster will be deader than if you shot it in the head with the semi-automatic pistol you were just legally compelled to buy at the grocery store. They sell guns at the grocery store now. It was in the bill. How can I be so confident the Republicans would do this? Because for pretty much my entire life, but most especially since Barack Obama was elected president, the Republican Party has demonstrated that it doesn't give a shit about the rules. To get what they want, Republicans won't think twice about changing the rules, and if that's not an option, they'll just ignore the rules and do whatever they want anyway and dare someone else to stop them. Republicans in the Senate only support keeping the filibuster right now because it's in their interest to do so. If they're ever back in charge, and inevitably they will be, because, as I mentioned last time, this is America and we suck, they'll nuke the filibuster the first time it stands between them and their goals. The best way for Democrats to protect the people of the United States from the destructive policies Republicans want to impose on them is for more Democrats to beat Republicans in elections. But that can be difficult, even at the statewide level of a Senate election in states where Republican-controlled state governments have enacted voter suppression laws that disproportionately affect segments of the electorate that are more likely to vote Democrat. That's why election reform and voting rights laws at the federal level are so important. But those laws, which are strongly supported by most Democrats, even the shittiest ones like Sinema and Manchin, can't make it through the Senate as long as the filibuster is in place. It seems like a catch-22, but only if we continue to treat the filibuster as some kind of bedrock principle of democracy that we dispose of at our own peril. That's not what it is. It's a parliamentary procedure that can be eliminated by a simple majority vote. Republicans are currently using it to block President Biden and the Democrats from enacting their agenda, but the Republicans will get rid of it to their own advantage as soon as they're back in power. So Democrats should strike first for once kill the filibuster, and start enacting their goddamn progressive agenda, also known as the shit they promised to do if we elected them. Second, if the Democrats do reform or eliminate the filibuster and they're able to enact their agenda, particularly proposed measures to strengthen voting rights and counteract voter suppression policies passed by the states, it will be more difficult for Republicans to win back a congressional majority in the future. Not impossible. America sucks, and the Democrats could fuck up a wet dream, but more difficult. Because the Democrats would have a list of tangible accomplishments to run on, and the Republicans would have to compete without the voter suppression policies that allow them to win elections in jurisdictions where they don't actually have the votes to win otherwise. The other major argument in favor of not touching the filibuster, which Senator Sinema mentions in her op-ed and which Senator Manchin has frequently cited as his main reason for not wanting to get rid of the filibuster, is that the filibuster forces senators to be bipartisan. I have a two-part response to this argument. One, no, it doesn't. And two, so what if it does? Part one. Senator Manchin and others who take this view insist that requiring at least 60 votes to pass filibuster-proof legislation requires bills to attract at least some voters from both sides of the aisle. Even if every Democrat supports a bill, they need to get a few Republicans on board in order to pass it. Even if we take it for granted that this is an inherently desirable thing, and I'll get to that in a minute, I think the last several years have made it clear that this is not the case. The filibuster doesn't result in the Senate passing bipartisan bills. Recently, it's resulted in the Senate not passing much of anything at all, at least nothing all that important or transformative. It might work that way if the Senate were populated by honest, good faith actors who were genuinely open to compromise and negotiation, but that does not describe the Republican caucus. Republicans aren't open to making a deal with the Democrats. They're only interested, and Mitch McConnell, the Senate's Republican leader, has openly said this, in blocking the Democratic agenda as much as possible. And while they're in the minority, they are using the filibuster to do it. Also, what if, hypothetically, the Democrats were to increase their majority to 60 seats? Would Manchin and Sinema still refuse to vote for bills supported by their 58 Democratic colleagues unless at least one Republican voted for them too? What if the Democrats won a 62-seat majority, meaning they could pass filibuster-proof bills without Manchin and Sinema's support? Would the filibuster compel bipartisanship then? Of course not. It only theoretically compels bipartisanship now because neither party holds a filibuster-proof majority. If either party ever wins enough seats in the chamber to defeat a filibuster without support from the opposition, this argument completely collapses. Part two. Let's pretend Manchin is right, and the filibuster does force Democrats and Republicans to work together and compromise and craft bipartisan legislation. Why is that necessarily a good thing? If one party wants universal health care and the other party wants to dismantle the most recent set of modest reforms to the healthcare system, how is watering down healthcare legislation in an attempt to appease members of the other party a good thing? If one party wants to invest in renewable energy and create jobs in cleaner emerging industries, and the other wants to gut existing environmental regulations and double down on fossil fuels that are propelling climate change, how is crafting a bill acceptable to members of both sides of that debate a good thing? The problem with bipartisanship in the United States in 2021 is that we don't have two major political parties who share similar goals but disagree on the best paths to reach those goals. We don't have two major political parties that are divided mostly by their philosophies on taxation or the optimal role of government or other issues that, after the last few years, seem almost quaint in their wonkishness. We have one major party that, for all its many, many frustrating flaws and shortcomings, wants to make things better for the poor, the marginalized, and the natural world, and another major party that is actively trying to destroy those things. We have one major party that definitely needs to do a much better job at fighting institutionalized racism. And another major party that is currently fighting tooth and nail to stop public school students from even being taught that institutionalized racism exists or has ever existed. We have one major party that, during the COVID-19 pandemic, has consistently supported public health officials and urged the public to wear masks and get vaccinated, and another major party that continues to aggressively attack all of those things and advocate policies and practices that are literally getting people killed. Only one major party opposes reproductive rights and workers' rights and LGBTQ rights. Only one major party spent a year spreading misinformation about mail-in voting, promulgating conspiracy theories designed to erode confidence in the electoral process, and supporting a corrupt president who refused to accept the result of the last election and even now is continuing to vainly campaign to overturn that result. Only one major party supported the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, an attack carried out in the name of that aforementioned defeated former president. Bipartisanship doesn't work when one of the parties is controlled by lawless, lying fascists who have proven again and again that they aren't interested in compromising, and they aren't interested in negotiating, and they aren't interested in reaching across the aisle. They're interested in doing as much as they can get away with, and they don't need to be debated or bargained with or reasoned with. They need to be defeated because their agenda is dangerous and deeply harmful to most Americans and to the fundamental institutions of our democracy. The most frustrating thing is, if pressed, most Democrats, even the most wishy-washy moderates, will admit that the Republicans' obstructionism and bigotry and anti-democratic efforts are dangerous and need to be stopped. But the likes of Manchin and Sinema and, far too often, President Biden himself continue to cling to this fantasy of bipartisanship. It's as if they think their humanity and commitment to parliamentary decorum will somehow move their Republican colleagues to change their minds. If we're nice enough to them, maybe they'll stop trying to set the world on fire. The more time that goes by, the more delusional that position is revealed to be. I want to say this specifically to any of my fellow Democrats watching this who might be sympathetic to these arguments. You're too attached to bipartisanship. Republicans know it, and they're going to use it to kill you if you let them. Please, fellow Americans, contact your senators and tell them you want them to end the filibuster, especially if you live in Arizona or West Virginia, the states represented by Senators Sinema and Manchin, respectively. Tell the Democrats of the United States Senate to stop playing nice, stop indulging in high-minded fantasies about bipartisan cooperation and seeking consensus and parliamentary tradition, and start doing what they need to do to enact their agenda and protect the rest of us from the Republicans enacting theirs, because those are the stakes. If the Republicans are able to strip away abortion rights, disenfranchise an even larger segment of the electorate, condemn LGBTQ people, women, black and brown people, and members of other marginalized groups to lives of permanent injustice and persecution, and drive the poor into deeper, more inescapable poverty than what they're living in now, no one is going to say, well, this is a nightmare, but at least the Democrats didn't do anything too disruptive trying to prevent it. You gotta respect them for that. Which would you rather keep? The filibuster or the Constitution? Because the Republican Party doesn't care about either one. And I fear we are rapidly approaching a point where holding on to the former will cost us the latter.